So we're here with Angus from Generate Accounting, and I always find it fascinating how different people run their businesses, and you've been doing it for 8 years now. But I'm curious, you did tell me before we started, it wasn't necessarily, you didn't wake up as or go through your adolescence dreaming about being an accountant necessarily.
No, definitely not.
But how did it all start? What made you start getting into this world?
Well, I mean, I did a little bit of an accounting degree at university. To be honest, I really enjoyed doing arts papers. So I ended up doing a Master of Arts in Politics, of all things. And that really qualified me for very little. But at the end of my master's degree, a friend of mine rang me up and asked me what I was doing for a job, because up until, the October of that year, I'd been getting a student allowance and I had a part-time job, and so everything was pretty good. But it hadn't occurred to me, of course, that after the exams, the government would stop paying me any money. So I thought that sounded like a bloody good idea to me, to actually go out and get a full-time job until I worked out something down the track. So it was a customer services role, and I went up to it was just up the hill in Simon Street, so just up from the university, and bright-eyed and bushy-tailed one Monday morning in October 1993, and presented myself for my first day at work at a company called Clear Communications. Had no idea what they did, and soon became clear they were a telecommunications company. And I left there 10 years later. So I started out in customer service. I quickly got into an account management role. Clear, of course, at that time were the second entrant into the market. So this is a time when the New Zealand telecommunications market was deregulated. And telecom as it was then, Spark now, but telecom in those days, we were their first competitor. So I did an account management gig down in Otago, which I thoroughly enjoyed. And off the back of that, transferred back up to Auckland again, went into what was called a sales executive role, which was new business development primarily, and then into sales management, specialist sales management as the company grew. And after 10 years, I left as a specialist sales manager.
What was the sales? Normally, accountants aren't necessarily the most extroverted of sorts, going out there hunting and selling. And was there some sort of fear or trepidation, or were you just naturally comfortable with people? Or? No,
I suppose I'm the anti-accountant in that regard. I always remember actually that I was struggling when I first got into a sales role, and fortunately I was surrounded by some incredible salespeople. And one of them who, I suppose he was kind of mentoring me, but it was never a formal thing. But kind of fell into it and, became the best of mates. And I always remember him saying to me, Angus, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. And if you use them in that proportion, you can't go wrong. Because I thought sales was all about talking to people and persuading them, but it's not at all. And so it's really around asking sort of informed questions to get the sort of answers that you need. And then, obviously went through a lot of sales training, and that's been invaluable. Even in my current role in public practice as an accountant, we do a lot of advisory board meetings with clients, and probably more than 50% of the discussion is around sales and marketing. So I suppose that makes me a bit unusual for an accountant, in as much as most accountants tend to, when I did finally finish off my accountancy papers, I did them part-time through Massey. I was always intrigued that the study that you do, none of it that I could recall actually talks about revenue at all. So for most accountants, revenue just falls from the sky, and once that's occurred, they take over and do the books, and it was interesting because As that sales career continued on, one of my last full-time gigs was as national manager of MYOB, the software company in New Zealand. And I always knew that if we were struggling to get a room full of accountants for one of our road shows, that we should put on a specialist speaker who would tell them how to sell. And as soon as we did that, we would pack the room. So there was a real hunger amongst accountants in terms of, the actual process of selling. How do I go about that? So it's an invaluable skill. Yeah.
Well done on keeping your composure. And we've got a little dog in the podcast.
Oh, this is Bertie. Yeah.
Bertie distracted you, and you get your composure. So well played.
Sorry about that.
No, it's all right. It's all part of it. I enjoy it, and I think it's an invaluable skill. I mean, you can't run a business if you're not selling, and if you don't operationally deliver on what that brand promises, then you don't have a business.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I actually, particularly with startups where people have got an idea for a new business or something like that, one of the first questions I ask them is, are you comfortable with selling? Which is tends to rock people back on their heels a wee bit because often they haven't thought about that. And of course, if you're starting out a new business, nobody else is going to be doing the selling but you. So if you're not comfortable with that process, and some people genuinely aren't, they're very talented at what they do. They just can't, bring a new business opportunity to a close, then they're really going to struggle.
It's so important, yeah. Client acquisition. I'm naturally fearful of people, and so I did commissionally selling for a number of years and management to sort of face that. And it's one of the most valuable skills I ever learned. As you say, it wasn't about manipulating or entertaining dogs while you're spinning yarn. It was about connecting and really understanding the person and helping solve that problem, a genuine problem. There'll be times where you get taught these objection handle models, they say this, you pretend like you understand, you tell them why they're wrong. But if you actually genuinely find the source of the true problem and your intent is to solve it, whether it's for you, your company, or it's just the right thing to say, it's been one of the most valuable tools. But I think it's always good to set the scene because not many accountants really share the information of how they're doing it. It's somewhat competitive. And what's the structure of the business that you have currently, like the staff members, how many clients, how you sort of service them?
Well, we have, we must have coming up to about 300 business clients now. And some just use us for compliance work. So what I mean by that is, I guess, keeping them compliant with the IRD and the company's office and tax returns and all that exciting stuff. That's still a really important part of our practice because, of course, that pays the bills. But an increasing amount of my time is being spent in business advisory. And the way that we structure that is we tend to have what we call advisory board meetings. And typically it'll be firms with more than one partner or one director. We go through a formal agenda process on a monthly or quarterly basis, depending on what the client needs. And we cover off all their, financial matters, of course. So we'll go through monthly accounts or quarterly accounts, look at cash flow, which of course is absolutely critical. And then we might talk a little bit around business planning. So it's very important to put a strategy in place. So we spend some time up front doing that and then really reporting against those KPIs.
Another well-received distraction.
Some coffee.
Receiving coffee while you're spinning the yarn as well.
Excellent.
Thank you, Fiona. That's our Director of First Impressions.
Excellent.
So, yeah, I see that morphing a lot in advisory or accountancy practices is that they are looking either to the advisory role from an interest and passion and also to de-risk the future of the business in terms of, there's still always going to be people that don't want to do it. Yeah. In terms of the high yield, high return, the compliance work pays the immediate cash flow, as you say, but the long-term worthwhile, like value for time, it's not quite in the same ballpark as advisory might be.
Well, the other thing we do with recruitment, I think, I'm not sure if it's been deliberate, but I've kind of ended up not following the classic advice when it comes to running an accounting practice. So, you know, most accountants would take the view that it's too hard to bring on staff members who aren't trained in financial accounting. So that's tax, basically. I take the opposing view, so I tend to attract candidates for the team who come from a commercial background because they've actually got some acumen. They understand what it's like to lose sleep over whether you're going to meet payroll or not, or to have an ongoing tax issue or something of that. So, you know, there's empathy there. They've actually experienced it in their prior career working in a commercial role. I can teach them the tax bit. But the critical thing is that they've got some commercial nous because, you know, frankly, that is what the clients are searching for. And I guess, you know, because of my fairly unusual career progression of sort of having a midlife crisis and becoming an accountant, which I think is probably a first in the history of the world, you know, I've had a lot of experience running large teams, working in the corporate environment. And of course, corporates were once small companies, but they're just incredibly successful. So, you learn a lot of skills at the corporate level that can be employed really usefully in small to medium enterprises.
That's a good point. I mean, like, you think business is a lonely endeavor somewhat, especially in leadership, where if you're a good leader, you're putting the interests of others before yourself, and you also have boundaries, so you're obviously making sure that you have self-love as well. But having someone that is in your court and is mutually invested in the outcome of your business, it makes sense that you would have that supportive role as part of an accountant. It's synergetic. But why do you think the traditional school of thinking is to have that qualification? Is it compliance risk? Is they feel like it's not a competency that they can develop in people that aren't interested? Or what do you think?
Oh, look, I think most accountants in practice are time poor. So they tend to accept all and every opportunity that comes across the doorstep. And I was certainly as guilty as the next person of doing that earlier on and running the practice. But these days, it's not a question of not wanting to take on additional clients, but I suppose we're a little bit more circumspect in as much as, is it going to be a good fit? Can I really add any value? And so there are certain industry types that I tend to specialize in as opposed to just being a generalist.
So obviously we don't want to exclude any of the business owners listening, but and you'd be open, there'd probably be attributes about that company and that person you would still gravitate towards despite them not fitting in that mold. But is there niches that you've discovered, and how did you discover that they were good for you and you were good for them?
Well, I mean, I've got a lot of professional service clients, for instance, because I'm in professional services. So that was I suppose the first logical industry type. But I've got a lot of people in building and construction, that's been really useful in terms of understanding the challenges there over the last probably 4 to 5 years that I've had those sorts of relationships. Big emphasis on cash flow, which is critical. But also, we have long-ranging discussions on health and safety, on HR, on recruitment of staff, you name it. So it's not just a really dry financial discussion. So building and construction has been one of those areas. Fortuitously with COVID, I didn't have any exposure in the hospitality area or tourism, which I'm very happy about. And I don't say that lightly. Obviously, those people have been through hell and back. But the reality in the Auckland market is that, a lot of people work in professional services, yourself included. So it tends to be a service type economy. We've had some retail and wholesale clients, and they continue to have advisory board meetings with me, particularly on the wholesale side, so importers. And they're going through some interesting challenges at the moment with trying to get stock into the country and satisfy client orders, and just when you think you've solved a problem, another one comes around the corner. So it's been a very dynamic time. But yeah, those are kind of the industries that I tend to specialise in, but I would never count anyone out.
Yeah, I find naturally certain industries are interested in what we have to do, but I think often people make the mistake of the business is separate from the person, but so often the person is the business, so it's like the attributes of who they are, what they're trying to achieve.
That's absolutely right. There's very few people who from a legal perspective, a company is a distinct entity from an individual, but for small to medium business owners, they don't actually get that. The company is them. Often their finances are mixed in together. They have personal guarantees that they've given, so they're not they don't have the full benefit of the limited liability company. If it was to fail, then the creditors will come after them. They might have extended their own mortgage to purchase the business or to grow the business, put capital in. So, that distinction between the company and the individual is not really the reality.
No.
So, normally when people come to me, I'm interested to understand why they got into business. I'm certainly interested to understand their personal goals, and to see if we can, as part of the business plan, pull together those personal goals and the company goals so that they are congruent. I think that's essential. You can't just look at the company in isolation.
Yeah, it's huge, and especially that vision aspect. I mean, we decided eventually, once I got over the fear, managed a team of 15, and there's the old analogy, people won't get on a bus if they don't know where it's going.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing if you're aligning your business goals to your personal goals. But you did touch on that guarantee side of things and limited liability. Is it the landscape's changed somewhat with trust? There's more disclosure requirements, and obviously it's not as airtight as it once was. And what do you sort of recommend to clients now in terms of protecting their I guess, that risk, mitigating against the potential risk of creditors coming for them?
Well, I suppose, normally I'll meet with a client for upwards of an hour when we first meet. And that's on a complimentary basis. There's no charge for that. We've obviously got to understand what's a mutual thing, so the client needs to feel comfortable with me and vice versa. But there's some initial things that I'll always say to the client, and one of those is around personal guarantees. I've probably been in practice long enough now to see the downside of personal guarantees when the company fails. So people just aren't very diligent when it comes to signing paperwork. We're all busy. Somebody puts a form in front of you and you sign it. The stuff on the back of the carbonated order form, all the terms and conditions in 8-point font, most people don't go through that. One thing I do always say to everybody, though, is make the effort, turn the page over, and just see if there's anything there called personal guarantee. And you'll be stunned how many companies have that as part of their terms and conditions. For instance, the company that I get my photocopier from, they wanted, when I signed a lease for the photocopier, they wanted a personal guarantee. Interestingly, though, when I scored that out, they didn't come back to me and say, well, we can't do business with you. So I think the legal fraternity, who are obviously acting in the best interests of those suppliers, they've obviously said in their advice that they should include a personal guarantee clause in there. But, as I say to my clients, score it out and don't agree to it. Because there will be other firms who are who won't demand that sort of thing.
Is it is there a reason why people might go the personal guarantee route and it makes sense, or is it a general?
Well, I don't think a personal guarantee ever makes sense, because what it's doing is it's eroding the limited liability structure of a company.
Okay.
So all of a sudden you are personally guaranteeing debts. You won't get away with scoring it out on a bank loan, unfortunately, or a mortgage document.
Yeah.
But certainly with commercial suppliers, I think it's part of a negotiation. So, you know, you can understand why suppliers do it. They want to mitigate their risk, and they want to make it as easy as possible to collect debt. But, you know, people who are committing themselves to any sort of obligation, I think, need to think twice before they do it.
All right, cool. Probably the accountants listening to this is like, oh, you bonehead Ryan, you should know all this stuff. But I'm willing to look stupid, so at least if I come across a client,
not at all.
Then I can at least point them in the right direction. I won't advise, but I'll say, here's a potential issue. You should talk to such and such. So you got that sales background, and I'll be interested. You're like, okay, I'm doing accounting, done my part-time. How am I going to do this? How am I going to sell? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? What was that like, and how did you start?
Well, I mean, I'd finished off my qualifications, and I was probably in my, early to mid-40s at that time. And so the prospect of coming from a senior sort of C-level type role into a junior or intermediate accountancy role was not really that attractive. Yeah. So I went out and bought a practice.
Oh, you just brought it?
Yeah, and I would not advise that to anyone. Talk about a baptism by fire. But fortuitously, I had a couple of senior accountants in the firm, and, you know, they were able to teach me, I suppose. So I knew all the accounting theory. I was fairly familiar with the software, having been involved with MYOB. But it's fair to say the actual mechanics of compliance were a bit rusty. Also, the person who was selling the firm stayed for about a 6-month period, so I was able to come up to speed faster that way. But it was, you know, looking back on it, you certainly always need to take risks in life, but I prefer to take you know, informed risks, and looking back on it, I'm not sure that was particularly well informed. But it worked. No one sued me. And you know, I think we've got a reasonable reputation in the marketplace now.
Yeah, you've done well. Pressure makes diamonds, huh?
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky thing, because one, as well, you're buying a relationship, and then you might provide a service in a way that they're not used to or not valuing in the same way that they would with the prior one. So there's a few challenges. What is it like to, like, if you were to console the dog as well as answer this question at once, would be if an accountant was looking to sell their business, or if an accountant was looking to buy their business, what are the lessons you've learned from that experience, and what? Obviously, potentially, maybe don't do it for one, but...
Yeah, well, I mean, technology's big. So, oddly, coming from a software background and technology background, it's one area of due diligence that I really didn't do well. I bought a practice with incredibly old IT. I'll never forget, actually, I think it was the first or second day after I'd taken the practice over, there was this quite loud beeping sound coming out of a cupboard. And I went down to investigate it, and sure enough, it was the server. Yeah. We may have to pause. I think he's just going.
Yeah. No, we'll just let the dog out. Needs to go to. They referred it through, or what allowed you to grow? Because it sounds like you had these senior accountants, and then the beeping. You got to tell me about the beeping.
The beeping,
first, actually.
Okay. So I think it was day 1 or 2 of taking over the practice, and there was this beeping sound coming out of a cupboard, and that was alarming, to say the least, because when I went and opened the cupboard up, there was a very old server in there, something that I had done no due diligence on whatsoever. So I'd obviously borrowed a large sum of money to buy the practice, and that looked like quite an expensive item. It was just happenstance, really. I ran into a fellow at a networking event who was starting up a technology company of his own, and he started talking to me about cloud computing, which this is 2012. It was all quite novel to me, and I mentioned my beeping box problem. And he said, "Oh, well, that's no problem. You don't have to buy a new server. We can put it all into the cloud for you." Which I thought was too good to be true. I think the bill for replacing the box was up for about $15,000, which I didn't have.
Oh, God, yeah.
So, I was open to any solution. So we probably, I imagine, we were one of the early adopters of cloud technology in the accounting industry, but not because it was planned. And I remember coming in, they cut over one... They cut over one weekend, and I came in on the Monday morning and turned on my laptop, and nothing appeared to have changed. And I was a bit concerned about that, so I rang them up and I said, "I thought you guys were cutting us over." "Yeah, we did that at the weekend." And I said, "Well, nothing's changed." And he said, "Well, get up off your seat, walk down the corridor, open up the cupboard, and see if the light's on that machine," which I did. And sure enough, it wasn't even plugged in. So the whole thing was extraordinary. It was just seamless, which was a huge relief. And we've never looked back. So, from that, I learnt the lesson that we need to get a little bit more productive in what we did. So we went paperless very early on. Wow. We developed a questionnaire that we send to the clients at the start of their preparing their financial accounts. That was done electronically, and all the paper records are digitised and shredded. So we're a no paper practice now, and in fact, no paper comes into the practice at all anymore. So that was quite early on in the piece, and we also adopted Xero quite early on in the practice. I think around about early 2013. So I actually said to the guys, I said, "You're using the software all day long, so you make the decision." But at the moment, I think from memory, we had upwards of 5 different types of software in the firm. We had MYOB, we had a little bit of Xero, we had 2 or 3 other vendors that we were using. So I said, "Look, this doesn't make any sense. I think we need to get really good at one piece of software rather than being average at 5. Yeah. So you go away and do the due diligence, come back to me with your recommendations, and whatever you recommend we'll run with." And, coming from MYOB, I was kind of expecting they would come back with a recommendation that we'll go with MYOB. But they came back and said, no, we want to do Xero. And so I'd made the big announcement, "It's your decision, not mine."
Oh, fuck.
So, I had to run with it. And I've never regretted it. So, we were very early adopters on Xero as well. So, all that technology stuff. Oh, and the other thing was, I learnt my lesson, and we've always had, state-of-the-art IT ever since.
Yeah, okay.
So, the fastest internet, all the accessories that are required to do the job properly, the, top-of-the-line headsets for the phone. We don't have a phone system. It's a digital system, the whole 9 yards, so that people are truly mobile. And, with COVID, that paid back in spades.
How do you, my experience is rather unusual. And also where we're aiming to go, because obviously my competitors are 50 plus and not necessarily tech savvy. So rather compete with the great white in the desert than the ocean. So that's why the social media as well. So did you find with the questionnaires, was there any challenges with adoption? Because construction industry aren't necessarily big on their computers, or how do you find it's actually taken your practice to the next level as well?
Well, I mean, it's hugely more efficient.
Okay.
When I first went into public practice, there were, we used to talk about shoebox accounts. So if you can imagine a shoebox full of paper, often more than one, people would come in with these shoeboxes once a year, and you might spend, 2 or 3 days making some sort of sense of it all, coding all that information into the computer, and it was all wasted time, essential, but delivering no value, and expensive. So, the advent of Xero, and eventually Xero did their own questionnaire, which we adopted. That's enabled us to make enormous productivity gains in the practice. There was an education piece there with clients, no doubt about that. But, if people really struggled, they just came in and sat with us, and we answered the questions, or these days we just do a video conference. So we work around. So we still have, I still have probably around about 20 clients who would be 70 plus and probably not that IT savvy. That's exactly how we deal with those clients, is that we will take them through either over the phone or on a video conference, if they can manage to work the video conference. And answer those questions with them. Yeah.
Well, we've had clients for 30 years. So we have 80-year-olds and 9-year-olds. So we understand that.
Well, I've got a 90-year-old mother, so I can understand that there is a generation that is not at all at home with technology.
Yeah.
And she's certainly in that camp. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating. One that probably explains why you don't necessarily have to do the traditional accounting, because you've got a systemized structure that people can go through the process as a means to mitigate their lack of understanding as they're going through it. Yeah. And you probably have some controls. What's your software stack? Like, what are you using? Are you using a CRM that integrates with Xero, or Xero has the capability to do everything?
Well, Xero has Xero Practice Manager, so we use the whole Xero suite. But in addition to that, we use a couple of software tools. One's called Float, which is a cash flow forecasting tool. Okay. And we use that particularly for our advisory board meetings, and it's excellent. It's actually Scottish. So with a name like Angus, I've got a bit of Scottish ancestry. So, the Scots are famous for short arms and long pockets. So it's perfect that a piece of cash flow software was developed there. But it works extremely well. And the other one we use is a thing called Fathom. And Fathom pulls all the data out of Xero and produces some excellent insight into KPIs around the business. And they can either be financial KPIs or non-financial KPIs. So we have some clients, for instance, who measure NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, in terms of how happy their punters are. And we will enter that manually into that system and measure that as a KPI over time. And clients love it. So for most people, I know this will come as a shock, but most people really don't get accounting, want to get accounting, and their eyes glaze over if you give them a set of books. So if you can actually produce something on a TV screen, as we do in the office, which is attractive visually, and displays KPIs in any way other than just a row of numbers, you get that experience around the table of people saying, "Oh, now I get it."
Yeah.
Which is a real breakthrough moment, Yeah.
Oh, it makes massive sense. I was talking we've got new things going on. We had an accountant, Jeffrey Hughes, and he built his practice. Well, initially he did an entertainment company, so he was running concerts and that sort of thing. Yeah. And his sort of lesson to me was that obviously we're all different learners.
Yes.
And we make this mistake in financial planning is very written heavy. And trying to visualize it and make it more engaging. So we've got the screen in the office, but we haven't quite got there. I'm somewhere between 66-year-old well-established financial planner and me trying to revolutionize the tech space, but still emulate what he does very well.
Right.
So we're trying to merge those two worlds, but it's a good lesson. What would be your advice to a practice that recognizes this is an important thing to do? How would you first start, or what would you look at? Just go all in, find where the red light is and chuck it in the bin. And
well, I think the whole profession is going through a lot of change. And there's no doubt that the age of the partner or partners in the firm will determine how quickly that change is occurring. So, I see some younger practitioners coming in now where there's a heavy bent towards technology. And I suspect, one thing I have learnt in practice is that not exclusively, but often you will attract clients who are around your age bracket.
Oh, okay.
And to go back to your point, what did you learn from buying a practice? If you buy a practice off a retiring accountant, what I didn't factor in, of course, is that a lot of the clients that I were purchasing were actually in that age group too. So, you need to assess how long are they going to be clients? Are they going to retire? Are they going to, go up north and relax. I think the younger practitioners who are coming into the industry have a natural bent towards technology. I think it's irresistible. The thing about business advisory is that everybody in the profession knows they should be doing it. There's a lot of discussion now around artificial intelligence, machine learning, those types of technologies where, if you are to believe those people promoting it, we might be looking in 5 to 10 years' time where compliance is a minor sort of a matter that's largely systemized and you press a button on a computer. And I'm not entirely sure we'll ever get to that stage. I think those people who are working in that area are finding it a little more challenging than they perhaps thought at first. I think they were seduced by the fact that accounting's all about numbers. Computers do numbers really well, so this is going to be a cinch, But, Xero's been promising artificial intelligence and machine learning now for many years, and nothing's come to market yet. But my advice would be to plan as if that's going to happen. Whether it happens or not is irrelevant. But how would you replace that revenue and income in your practice if the compliance thing were to disappear? And business advisory is a key part of that. It's actually what clients want. So you said earlier on that, being in business can be lonely. And it certainly can. So people actually want someone who's got their back, but has some commercial acumen to help them through, and hopefully to wise them up to, potential pitfalls that they can avoid. And there's a huge market for it, an enormous appetite for it. But I think there are a lot of practitioners who are confused about how do you actually go about doing that? How do you sell that service? And how do you bring clients on into that advisory space? So in terms of our experience around that, one of the things that we did early on was to say to people, look, we have these things called advisory boards. They're a monthly meeting. We discuss all this stuff. Why don't you make a time, come in, we'll take you through what we would do in a normal monthly advisory session or quarterly advisory session, and there'll be no charge. Now, the concept of that for a lot of accountants in practice might be a little alarming, but believe it, it's a one-off. But it's kind of saying, look, if you don't see any value in this, then you're free to walk out the door. I'll never mention it again, you know. But I'm proud to say that every time I've offered a free advisory session, then that client moves into that advisory space quite quickly. You know, part of that is technology. Part of it's commercial acumen. So, you know, the one thing about accountants in practice is that they see and hear a lot about business. And whilst they may not consider themselves to be particularly good at business, in terms of a traditional business as opposed to a professional business, you know, they pick up an awful lot of information along the way. And so I think it's like anything in life. You feel really quite almost like an imposter when you start doing business advisory on a formal sort of a basis, but you get better and better and better at it. So yeah, I encourage any practitioner who's not currently dabbling in that space to use that approach to say, or even just to be honest and say, look, this is something we're thinking of doing. I need some guinea pigs to practice on. Would you mind being a guinea pig for me? Yeah. And just see if you see any value in what I'm doing. And the agenda's not that hard to pull together. So obviously there's going to be a financial component. So that's reviewing monthly accounts. It's talking about debtors. So, understanding when revenue is going to come into the company is really important for cash flow. So that could inform a 15, 20-minute conversation. You then talk about roadblocks. So what are the roadblocks in the business that you're feeling at the moment? And often the client will disclose a whole bunch of stuff which might inform the rest of that meeting. There's never nothing to talk about. I've never had that at all. So there's always a challenge in somebody's business that they want to talk about. And of course, if you've aligned their own personal goals with the business, then it may not just be about the business. Yeah. Which is fascinating. So, you know, as you develop relationships with clients, you often find yourself being in a situation where they disclose a whole bunch of personal stuff to you too. And accountants, obviously, confidentiality is a key part of accountancy. And so I think, you know, it's funny. Sometimes I feel a bit like a modern day priest, you know, sort of this confessional. You know, it's good to have that depth of a relationship. Yeah.
That makes it, I mean, we see ourselves as the trusted advisor. Sure, you sit down, you do the plan, think about insurance structure, protect them. But really, it's like someone that's there when you need them and of capacity that they have a competency in. So as we wrap this up, what would be a good place to find you? Like maybe there's an accountant that's looking to get into the field and maybe you're hiring, or maybe you're thinking in the 10-year time frame, your succession plan, maybe they want a good systemized approach or something like that. How would they find you?
Oh, look, I'm always only too delighted to talk to other practitioners or people wanting to enter the industry. I'm heavily involved in CPA Australia, which is the professional body that I belong to, and I do that routinely. I even mentor one or two people as part of that. So, yeah, I think that's a very important part of it in terms of giving somebody a hand up. I didn't have that. So I know I would have appreciated it. So, yes, Generate Accounting is the name of the firm. Only too delighted to catch up for a coffee or a chat, because, you know, a lot of challenges that other practitioners are facing, there will be commonality. And it's interesting what you said earlier. You know, it's we so often go to professional events, and there's often a networking opportunity afterwards, and there tends to be a natural reservation amongst practitioners to actually say, well, I've got this problem, what are you doing about it? I don't know why that is, and, you know, I'm really keen to break that down, because, you know, we're not really competitors. There's plenty of business out there. You know, who cares if somebody adopts one of your great ideas? Isn't that, you know? I would have thought that's a feather in your cap.
Yeah, it is the stuff. I mean, one of the best lessons I ever learned was I was over competitive in the sales environment at the expense of the people in the company, and I got told off by one of the people I trained, like, why do you do that? And realised it was insecurity, and actually it was not serving my best interest because I'm coming from a scarcity mindset. So since then, I've just been freely open to sharing and growing with people because it's in my best interest. It challenges me to be better. Teaching encourages the knowledge to last and for you to connect and understand it better. But on that note, I'll have it in the description. I'll have your if there's any social media, LinkedIn maybe. But we'll definitely have your website. And thanks for coming on.
Well, good. Thanks for having me.